at the bottom.
Recording.
It hasn't started at the beginning, so something's slightly...
Looking very smart, Max.
Let me try again.
DAJ. Faster than Max.
That's better.
Oh.
Right, so this is a trip we did back in 2009.
Oh, right.
God, that was light years ago.
July 2009, yeah.
Yeah, can I give you a sort of background to this? In January 2009, I became divorced. And my daughter thought that I was remarkably uptight and needed to chill, mum, and suggested that the best way of doing it would be to go to Pakistan, that well-known tourist destination, on a hot rock trip that she had done something similar as part of her gap year. Hannah, for her gap year, had been on this hot rock trip through that equally well-known tourist destination of Syria. So anyway, that's kind of the background. We decided that we would go. It worked out that we could join the trip in July and we would have a whole 2 months with it. And Hannah came out and joined us for the bulk of the trip. And I did chill because you just kind of had to. So we joined the trip in Lahore.
We joined
So
here.
her Syrian trip was before all the trouble then?
Yes, very much so. Yes, yeah. Hannah would have gone out to Syria in 2007.
Okay.
2000. Yeah, to about 2007.
God.
So we flew into Lahore, got ourselves to the Pakistan-Indian border and waited for about 6 hours for this truck to roll on through, and we joined it.
Clear customs.
And that kind of yellow line is an approximation of the route.
So that's travelling from India into Pakistan. Ooh.
India to Pakistan, then into China, and then into Tibet.
There were a few people who'd done the whole trip, and they joined the truck at the southern end of India, and were going all the way through to Singapore.
Yeah.
And that was taking them 9 months. Oh, there we go.
Wow.
So we got upgraded to first class.
Hey.
I think that's because I put a shirt on. When we arrived, it wasn't exactly first class then.
No.
Huge.
That's Pakistan.
This is Pakistan. I think this is still in Lahore, driving out of Lahore. I've got a note in my diary to say that it wasn't smelly, but I find that difficult to believe, really.
Mm.
Some nice colourful trucks.
Brilliant.
Incredibly decorated. Yeah.
So this was the guy they assigned to us as the Karakoram Highway, or this section of it, was decided to be dangerous. And he decided he was going to poke this, whatever weapon it is, out the top of the window of his truck, which didn't really make any of us feel any safer.
No. He was
I think
quite,
we would have been a lot better off without
quite
it.
gung-ho. But at the time, the Foreign Commonwealth Office were advising against travelling up the Karakoram Highway, which...
Well, for this...
That's why you went.
Yeah. So, anyway...
This is some of the other travellers en route. This is the guy chopping up the travellers.
Those are the chickens. Those are the same chickens?
They look like pigeons to
I tried
me.
the same ones. I didn't identify them through the process. That's the truck.
Very much a truck and not a bus.
Well, it drove like a truck and it felt like a truck driving it.
Oh,
And there's a climbing wall on the back that...
that's some truck.
How many people do they have in that?
I don't really remember.
There must have been about 12 of us.
No, there were more than 12 of us. Yeah.
This is the road.
One of the better sections.
This is one of the worst sections.
Oh.
As you can see, there's not really enough room to get one truck down there, let alone pass anybody else.
So how do you do social distancing then?
You can see they're trying to build it. There's a, I don't know whether you can see the mouse here, but
Yeah.
they've got some rickety old bars in here, and I assume they're going to fill this in with concrete or something to try and make the road a bit wider.
All the way up the Karakoram Highway, there were just hundreds and hundreds of Chinese workmen all living in makeshift tents along the side of the road. And the Pakistan people hated them. And they all drank hideous moonshine, which was...
This is where we ended up for our first part. So we've been quite a long way north. We've gone through Gilgit and then further up the Karakoram Highway, and we've ended up in a place called Pasu village. And this we're going to camp just next to this hotel
called the Glacier Breeze.
Glacier Breezes Hotel. Yeah.
A great name.
Was it open and could you get a beer there?
Yes.
Well, where do you can get beer?
No, you couldn't get beer. You can't, technically you can't drink in Pakistan. It's a pretty Muslim country. And that was something that was interesting as we were driving up through the country in Gilgit, where most of the rest of the group actually turned off and went to Skardu, which I think is where Paul went off to do some of the climbing he did.
What, Katie?
In Gilgit, the women there are all in complete full burqas. You couldn't see them at all. Full coverings. When we got up to Pasu, the women were very much just a light headscarf.
Yes, it's all Ismaili Muslim
Yes.
in Pasu and around this area, so it's much more relaxed.
It was really interesting seeing such different versions of Muslim
This is the map.
through the country.
This is the map that we were using, and we decided it wasn't quite detailed enough, and we couldn't carry everything we needed, so we hired a bloke as well. So Pasu is here. This is the Karakoram Highway following this river up north, and these dots are our camps in successive nights. And this was our peak, and then we went back going north and then following until we eventually got back to the road, and then hailing down a taxi and negotiating a price to take us all the way back up here again. Batura Glacier here, we were on that for kind of 2 or 3 days, and it's quite big. I'll show a few photos of the glacier. So this is us trekking in. That's the guy we hired. He acted as a porter and a guide.
We paid him as a porter and he acted as a guide.
He was kind of doing both.
Yeah, he was wonderful.
And there's not much there, and we didn't see many other people. One of the evening camps.
This was our first evening. There are quite a lot of shepherd's huts and summer villages along the way, because the cattle, the goats go up to the high ground over the summer, and there are these shelters there, which when they were there, Aman, our guide, used. We put our tent up, but this was the first campsite that we used.
Just like Scotland, then.
Yeah, marvellous little bothies.
A better wood burner than most of the bothies.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bigger teapots.
So this was the what do you
This
call
is the
it?
moraine wall of this Batura glacier, and it's huge and unstable. But that was the way up.
We were anticipating potentially being out for up to 10 days, so we were carrying a reasonable amount of food, climbing stuff. This was our second campsite, and I don't think we've got a photo of this, but we picked up 4 young boys
Mhm.
as we crossed the glacier to get to this summer village. They had never been across the glacier before, and Aman guided them as well. They were on holiday from school and wanted to come up here and stay the night. And they spent the whole evening playing cricket. We were knackered, but they must have been young teens,
Yeah.
I guess. But it was just really funny seeing them playing cricket up here.
No, good.
Between the goats. Carrying on, heading up the glacier, and eventually we turned off. And this is the Batura range. We're looking
Looking at Batura wall. Yeah.
Batura wall, which has seen quite a few expeditions. I think this was our loveliest camp spot. It was just beautiful. Aman, our guide, had no tent, no sleeping bag, no duvet jacket, and a pair of boots that quite honestly didn't look like they fitted him. He was my height and carrying more than Daj was carrying.
Well, he carried 20 kilos for us, but he didn't have much of his own gear, so he was probably only carrying about 22 kilos.
Well,
But that was
maybe.
still more than we were carrying.
Yeah.
Mm.
And he used to be a teacher.
Oh, wow.
But I think we were the first people who'd actually hired him for a few years. He said there used to be quite a lot of Germans going out there and climbing, and they used to get quite a lot of traffic and tourists because of all the trouble and all the Islamist fighting and stuff.
They'd completely lost their tourist trade.
Yeah, the advantage with staying overnight is you get some good sunsets and sunrises. Can't remember which
Wow.
And we had a few visitors.
We're not quite sure whether these are yaks or zoes. Really useful word in Scrabble or bananagrams, zoe, which you can spell either DHZO or ZHO. Almost any variety is feasible. Useful Scrabble
Get rid
word,
of
useful
Zs.
bananagram word, yeah.
We kind of lose any paths, and we're just going up this stuff for a while until we get to our final. That's an intermediate camp.
Yeah.
Oh, that might have been
That-
might have been our
Our
advanced
highest-
camp.
Yeah.
That is us heading off up to the peak that we've identified. There's a trekking peak. I think it's called Wharton Peak at 550.
Yeah.
So just under the 6,000 metre mark. Again, nobody else around. I don't think anybody had been up here for years.
And I doubt that, I very strongly doubt anyone's been up it since, in all honesty. It wasn't that cold. I had the most hideous altitude sickness. I was not feeling that smile. But it was retrospectively stunning.
So after spending the night in our advanced camp again, having climbed things, we decided to go down this other route. And our Amman, this guy who was guiding us, was a bit unsure about taking us down there because he said nobody else had been down there this year. And we said, well, we'd really like to go that way because we don't want to walk all the way back the way we've just come. So he said, yeah, okay, let's go. And we elected to keep our mountaineering boots on rather than switch back to trainers, which was a very good idea, as you can see. We had walking poles and he just had this long wooden stick and he would kind of surf his way down with his stick out to one side and travel down these massive scree fields at quite a pace.
It's been interesting because we've actually seen this technique on various sort of National Geographic type films now that is obviously quite traditionally used as a way of getting down steep scree fields. That was a hideous long day down, unbelievably, this looks all right here, but unbelievably chossy, difficult terrain.
There's a green patch just around here somewhere. That's where we're heading for the night. And we were quite relieved all to get there.
Yes.
I think Amman was just as relieved as we were.
Yeah.
And then the following day, we're heading out of the valley again. And we're following these irrigation channels.
Oh.
You can see the greenery is pretty localised. And that everywhere is just totally barren apart from these irrigation channels. Finally, we make it to some villages.
And then we sat and waited for 6 hours, hoping that a car would come by and give us a lift.
And eventually one did after about 6 hours.
Yeah.
We haggled for a price and they took us all the way back to Pasu.
Yeah.
What's this ice climbing thing?
So this is...
we got back to Pasu and the others
all arrived.
had all arrived. And this
in their
was...
little Skardu expedition.
Yes, they'd been out to Skardu. I don't even remember what they did in Skardu, but they didn't do anything big. They were all mostly sort of climbers, not mountaineers, but they were all quite keen to have a go at, well, certainly putting their crampons on.
I think the guy who's organised these trips had sold it as you'll get the opportunity to go and climb big mountains, and they'd all brought crampons out, and half of them hadn't used them before, at least some of them hadn't, and didn't look like they were going to use them. So we volunteered to take them up onto the glacier and do a bit of crevasse rescue practice. So that's what these guys are doing now. And we were out for the whole day wandering around the glacier and doing some crevasse rescue stuff.
This was, there was another glacier coming down sort of pretty much parallel with the Batura glacier called the Pasu glacier. This one was actually much whiter. They were two very different glaciers really, weren't they?
There's moraine on this one.
Yeah.
That's the Pasu glacier. And we kind of went up it and crossed it and eventually made our way back to the Glacier Breezes campsite. And this is our cooking area.
Yeah, this was Daj's turn. Daj was on cook duty with this young lad here who is now a doctor. The chap with his arms up was the truck driver. And this was our wonderful guide, Porter, who invited us back to his home for tea.
Like you
and this was just so lovely and so special. I think being able to go and do, it wasn't a big name peak and it wasn't massively high, but the intimacy of it being just the three of us and not being caught up in massive expeditions with all sorts of, everything that goes with that was actually really special. I think about these guys a lot because I think about 2-3 years after we were here, there were hideous floods. And the river that is really quite close to their home, the massive Hunza River, is it the Hunza River?
Yeah.
Would have flooded where they were and swept away. We actually heard on national news of really bad landslides and flooding here.
So what would he do? I mean, he took you, he guided you and ported for you, but what would he be? How did he manage to make a living?
No idea. I think there were quite a lot of people in the area who were guides, and it's a lottery who you get, because the system is the guides sort of queue effectively like a taxi rank.
Yeah.
And we got Aman and some other people got the next people, the next guide.
Well, it was slightly more complicated than that, because originally they wanted us to take three porters, a cook, and a guide, and we said no, we're not really interested in taking that many people, because we'll end up with an expedition, and we don't really want that. And eventually somebody hit on the idea of us going down to see Oman to see if he would do it. And, he come to the chance, and that was that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also too, partly where we wanted to go, no one had been there for quite a few years, and in fact Aman said he had only travelled out the way we went twice before. It was only his third time going out that way. So
Okay. So I mean, you probably, it wasn't probably a massive amount you paid him, but what was it like for him? Because I mean, you pay them, say, I don't know what it would be, but you pay them a certain amount, but it's like it's a much bigger deal to them than it is to you.
Yeah.
yes, I don't know.
We negotiated a price. We paid him what he asked, and then we gave him a huge tip. And I also gave him a down jacket as It didn't. I don't think it fitted him quite, but I figured if he was going to go out there again, he might at least have a coat that was marginally warm.
Probably sold it by now.
Well, probably sold it immediately after I gave it to him.
Maybe,
There we
but
are.
I'm not sure who to.
Yeah,
It,
there weren't many.
it's a very small village. It's a very small village.
Anyway, this is the river that runs past their house,
Wow.
and this is one of the methods of crossing it.
There are villages on the other side, and this is the way they get across, including carrying children and goats. It's sort of quite a well-known walk called the Walk of the Two Bridges, and I've got.
This is the other bridge.
This is the other bridge.
Which is even worse condition than the first one you saw.
Yeah. I've got quite a phobia of bridges at the best of times. And I can't tell you how sick I felt crossing this. You cannot cross this bridge with your eyes closed, which is tricky.
You can see the old bridge next to it.
Yeah.
I don't know at what point they decided that one was no good and they'd better put another one up.
But it was really interesting and good to do. So we carried on. After that, the others joined us. We were in Pasu for a little while, and various little bits of rock climbing were done, but the rock around there is pretty chossy on the whole. I think we drove down to another village and had a look at something one day, but it was pretty dodgy. So I think we would have been there the best part of 3 weeks, actually. Stop a minute.
We're heading up north, up the Karakoram Highway,
Yeah,
and we've crossed the Kunjarab Pass, and we've headed into China. And after a fair bit of delay at the border, with them figuring out whether we were allowed to do this or not, and whether we needed a guide and all the rest of it. Eventually, they let us through, and we've headed into the first Chinese town, Tashkurgan, and
We are
these
thrilled.
last few slides are the slides that have greeted us, and we're thrilled to see this bread.
Bread, yeah, we were all really happy to have some bread. We hadn't had bread. Food on Hot Rock was unbelievably basic.
And
This is for Max.
a good health and safety slide.
Yeah,
When that was running, it just looked horrific.
God.
They've got no safety guards or anything.
Oh,
Wow.
We haven't got a clue what that was.
This, however, is just on the outskirts of this Tashkurgan place. There are still quite a few nomadic yurt people living.
No cup of tea?
Um,
It's kind of weird because it's really green and then totally barren.
this lady is one of the Uyghurs, and this was really interesting because when we went here, having been told that the Karakoram Highway was off limits and it wasn't safe to go there, that was all fine. But when we drove into China and actually into Kashgar, as we were about to drive into, that was really kicking off. And this was in 2009. And it's been really interesting hearing everything that's been happening to the Uyghur population since then. Now, this is another variety of Muslim. And it was just fascinating seeing all these different Muslim women wearing such totally different clothes. They had the most bizarre clothing a lot of the time.
Just on the outskirts of this, on the way to Kashgar, you've got this, I guess it's a trekking peak, but it's 7,500 meters high. What's it called? It's Mustagata. So it's quite a well-known expedition peak in this area. It looks like it'd be a really good skiing peak. I don't know whether people do ski up and down it. But we had a look at it and loitered here for a bit and then carried on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is me and my daughter.
This is us arriving in Kashgar. We've got some tarmac,
Yes,
concrete.
it was the first proper smooth tarmac we'd seen for ages, but interesting the contrast of modern taxis and old donkey carts. Kashgar was very, very much like that. This was Shipton's Arch, which is the highest natural arch in the world. I think I'm right in saying. Yeah. It has been climbed. It had been climbed. I should have looked this up, but
the National Geographic sent an expedition out to make some film, and they climbed up and put some bolts in.
Well, I think there was one bolt, and then my daughter and our sort of leader of this hot rock trip made the second ascent or the third ascent and put another couple of bolts in. It was pretty chossy. Not worth the climb really, but what you can't see is that the height of the climb really is the other side of that arch. And yeah, it was an extraordinary
Some of the local delicacies.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Some of the local people.
Weird contrast again.
Weird Daj drinking some of the local delicacies. And again,
Is that super chai?
this was yet again another version of the Muslim people in this area.
Well, these are Uyghurs.
These two are Uyghurs, and they were extraordinary. So the women wear, you can't really see, particularly in this one, but a lot of the women wear these sort of floor-length, black, heavily embroidered coats with high-heeled shoes, and then what looks for all the world like a heavy brown tea towel over their head. And you cannot work out how they can see. And it really does look like there's a little girl in the background there. And the little girls have their heads shaved like little boys. But they wear these extraordinary, the kind of dresses that Italian little girls wear for their first communion. They're bizarre costumes. Kashgar was extraordinary because in parts of it there were these ladies with the brown tea towel on their head and these actually very beautiful black embroidered long coats and these very weird little girls. And you would move to a street 2 streets away and there would be Han Chinese walking around in miniskirts.
Yeah.
But on a Friday when the mosques came out, you really didn't want to be anywhere near them because the tension was absolutely palpable. And there were Chinese soldiers driving around, circling the town, the city, the whole time with machine guns just pointing at anyone. So we've got fairly limited photos because it didn't feel safe to be seen with a camera.
No.
Did order a pot of tea.
Sorry?
What was it that Dad was drinking? Was that super chai?
It was some alcoholic beverage with one of those nasty little worm things in it.
Yeah.
It was alcoholic.
This, however, was rose tea.
This was
Right.
nice and healthy. Very nice.
Yeah. There was a wonderful ancient marketplace with exactly what you would kind of expect there. And then weird modern buildings. Just
Right next to older buildings.
yes. But I think I've read that a lot of those old buildings have now been completely demolished.
Mm.
A lot of it's completely gone. All these people were heading to a local market and a variety of donkey carts with sheep on the back and the 2-humped camels.
So we're heading now into Tibet. So we've left Kashgar
As a horse. It's a camel.
and we're heading up fairly swiftly, which was a bit of a problem for most people. I think me and Claire were better off because we'd actually been climbing and been up to 5,000 or 5,500. Some of the others hadn't got that high yet.
No.
We're now driving straight up onto the Tibetan plateau, and the guy who's running the trip wasn't really up on acclimatization and how dangerous this could be.
The whole of the Tibetan plateau is above 4,000 meters.
We've driven straight there.
This was
Stop.
Yeah, this was one of the overnight stops. Rubbish just goes out the back of wherever they live, which just seems so sad, but it is the way it is there. The roads were pretty non-existent on the whole.
We're on the road here.
We are on the road here.
Doesn't look any different from not on the road.
But if you were to go out there now, there are roads.
They were in the process of building
Yeah,
this one.
this
So I think
whole-
the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative thing.
It was cold. There are,
And dusty.
yeah, we were really grubby by now.
Pretty sure these ones are yaks.
Orzos. And I think this was our sort of first real sighting of Tibetan people.
This is where they're living, up here.
Ah.
You just see a yurt and a, I don't know what this is here, but they're in the middle of nowhere.
But what you probably can't see is that they've got a satellite dish and a quad bike.
How they survive, I don't know.
It's so barren.
But this is our next stop,
This
which
is
is Mount Kailash.
this was probably for me one of the most special things we really did. Our mountaineering trekking peak was wonderful, and it was lovely to do it just with Aman and just the two of us. But this is Mount Kailash, and in the West, very few people seem to have heard of it. But out in this area, it's more famous than Everest. It is the most sacred mountain for the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Jainists, and the Bon religion. For all of them have their different reasons for it being incredibly sacred. It's never been climbed because of it being a sacred mountain. The Chinese offered Messner the opportunity to climb it, and he declined it on the grounds of it being a special sacred mountain, and so he didn't. It's considered the navel of the world, and the four sort of biggest rivers in that area all come from it. The main tributary from the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, and another one I can't say, but four big rivers all have their origins from this mountain. So it is indeed in many ways the navel of the world. And of course, as a result of it being sacred and the navel of the world, it is a site of incredible pilgrimage for all these four religions. A small group of us hot rockers decided to do it, to walk round. You can do it in a day. It's about 52 kilometers, but it does go up quite high at one point, 5,500 meters, and you are at altitude. So it was, I found it an extraordinary experience, going and doing something which to us was just a trek, but to almost everybody else that we saw going around it was something intensely spiritual and important. And certainly for the Buddhists who are going around it, I think it's meant to, I mean, apart from anything, it's meant to bring you good luck, but I think it's also meant to absolve you of all your sins to that point. So that's quite a useful thing to do. For the Hindus who are coming from India, many of them will have been sent by their families who have saved up to come and do this. And they are coming up on the shortest trip that they can possibly afford. And they're the Hindus that we saw doing this, most of them were doing it they were being taken around by local people on pony.
Well, I'm
Sorry.
just conscious that we've got a lot of photos, and if we talk too long, we won't get through them. Most people go around clockwise.
The Hindus and the Buddhists go around clockwise. The Jainists and the Bon religion go around anti-clockwise.
So we elected for clockwise. Go with the flow.
This is most people would normally do it in 3 days. You can do it in a day, but there are Buddhists who do it prostrating all the way round, and it would normally take them about 4 weeks
This is one of the prostrators. You can
Um,
see he's got the protective knee patches,
and flip-flops on his
flip-flops
hands.
on his hands.
And they don't carry anything else with them.
Well, he got flip-flops on his hands.
Oh, any chance?
Well,
Watch.
because
Oh, I don't know.
this is the way they get round.
Oh, God.
You're stopping to pray, so.
So they've got to lie down, put their hands out, then they can put their feet, they get up again, put their feet where their hands were, and then repeat that however many million times it takes them to get all the way around.
Gee whiz.
So yeah, 4 weeks.
Yeah. Penitent steps.
Yeah, and carrying almost no food with them. So
There are camps on the way around. I think in one of those previous photos you could see a few tents. So they will allow, well, there is food that you can buy on the way around. We just camped. It was all very pleasant.
and it is the most spectacular mountain. This was one of the Tibetan ladies who would have been leading a pony with a probably Hindu pilgrim in one of the camps. Again, it's just the most beautiful mountain. It's a sort of perfect pyramid. There are these everywhere in Tibet. There are snooker tables, pool tables. I don't know. Pool tables outdoors.
This one has seen better days, as you can see.
Well, I think they'd all seen better days. But, and I don't know whether that's the same lady, but again, the local Tibetans.
That's some good picture people, aren't they?
Local monk doing the trip for. There's a high pass, and I don't that you when you cross, you're meant to leave. We haven't got a photo of it, but most people leave an item of clothing behind, and that's meant to signify casting off the bad and becoming renewed, I think. And you also leave a small something for the gods. I think we left some jelly beans. We hadn't got anything else. We couldn't afford to leave any clothing behind.
Was Hannah still with you at this time?
Hannah was suffering terrible altitude sickness, and was most upset not to be able to do this, but she was actually taking...
She took some Diamox in the end.
Which I think I'm not sure, it didn't make her worse. This is a classic Tibetan town. One street, a row of buildings either side, and behind those buildings will be rubbish and dogs and people going for a crap.
Oh.
This is one of the hotels.
Suddenly Meal Hotel.
Yes.
Maybe lost the translation.
Weird translations into English.
It was a very multicultural truck, and this chap is Belgian. There were a couple of Mexicans, Spanish girl,
Obligatory pair wheels.
German, back horns.
Quite sure why they were all piled up like this, but there's obviously some significance. Some of the Mani stones.
What stones?
Mani stones. I don't know what they're for or why they carve those symbols on them, but I guess if I was more up on Buddhist religion, I might. Not
Again,
a pool table, but this thing in the front's quite interesting.
Yeah. Was it Mani or Omani?
Mani.
All right. Because Mani Padme.
Well, they could be related.
Yeah.
No,
It's
it's definitely
just
carved
so-
about mantras.
Is that
It's the Buddhist mantras that they carve in the Mani stones. So if
Yes.
you see them, you always go around them clockwise. You always do everything clockwise.
this is a solar kettle
Nice.
So it's a slow cooker. And
with some focusing bent. I'm not sure if it was aluminium. It's probably been bent out of some vehicle. It's probably the bonnets of two vehicles.
but you saw these all over the place. Slow cookers outside on and pool tables.
Pool tables in better nick.
Yeah.
Mm.
But the road isn't.
Mm.
This was another health and safety shot, really. So we've washed our vegetables to cook our meal in that dish.
It's all fairly sordid.
It was, pretty squalid.
Wow, that's a sky.
Yeah,
Back on the road again.
Not watching them.
The truck wasn't 100% reliable, and we did spend quite a lot of time fixing it and various things that broke on the way round. I can't remember what the breakage was here, but we're trying to fix it before whatever is headed in that dark sky in the background hits us. Actually, I don't think it did hit us. It veered further south. But yeah, it's quite
It made for
melodramatic.
quite dramatic pictures.
Mm.
All the locals.
Yeah, very much Tibetan people here. And as you can see, there's a lady in the background wearing a face mask. We were out at the time, I think it was of bird flu. It could have been SARS. And everywhere we went, we had our temperature taken. And there were a lot of face masks. This was the road.
Yeah, this isn't an excursion off-road. This actually is the road.
Very, very grassy for a road.
Well, you can see how the road goes. We're now looking at this with trepidation as to how sandy this is going to be. And actually, we do get stuck. We have to get the sand ladders. Luckily, the truck is carrying some sand ladders, and we get those out, and eventually we get it out.
Classically Tibetan building.
We're getting into some small towns now.
What did most of the people on the truck actually do? They obviously,
How do you mean?
well, it's meant to be a climbing trip, isn't it? Like, it doesn't sound like they actually climbed much.
No, not in this section, no.
No, and actually a lot of the others got quite frustrated. A lot of the others really did not enjoy the Tibetan bit. The roads were the research hadn't been done very well for Tibet, and the roads were a lot worse than had been expected. I mean, it just didn't exist really.
So, was it basically sightseeing for most of that, effectively?
Well, it should have been sights. There should have been more sightseeing because, I mean, we drove past some amazing monasteries that some of us would have liked to have spent longer looking at. But because the roads were so bad, we had to spend, I mean, our driver was driving for 12 hours a day or more at times. And there were one or two, either we drove through the night once for some reason or another because the road was about to be closed.
Yeah, they were going to close it. And that
But
was
the
the only
other-
way to get through.
The other issue that hadn't been researched very well was the fact that in order to do anything in Tibet, you have to have a guide. And your guide stops you from, well, attempts to stop you from doing anything. They have a very rigid itinerary of what you're allowed to do. And so we broke that itinerary a lot by camping when we were meant to stay in proper guest houses.
That's Hannah, by the way.
This is Han. We were all looking pretty rough by that point. We stopped to climb in one place, and our poor sort of guide was really upset because technically we weren't allowed to. You have to have permission to do anything in China, and we weren't allowed to do it, but we were fairly anarchic.
Were the guides Tibetan or Han Chinese?
I think the guide was a Tibetan guy. But he was...
Was he Tibetan? I don't know. No, I thought he was
so.
Chinese.
No, he wasn't. But he had to answer to his superiors.
Yeah.
And if there'd been any complaints made to the local officials, then he would start losing points. And if he lost enough points, then he would be struck off the register of people who could work as a guide. So by us getting him into trouble, could have cost him his livelihood, basically.
But most of the people on the truck were quite young, and I don't think they really appreciated this until a lot later. It was, and they were very keen to climb, and there wasn't really very much climbing there, so they were very keen to get through Tibet as quickly as possible and get into the next area of good climbing. Some of us were quite interested in seeing Tibet because I think we were very aware that it was a country very much on the cusp of big changes. You could see that the Han Chinese were moving in and changing it very much, and the Tibetans themselves too, where they wanted to keep their own traditions. They also wanted everything that came with Han Chinese, like computers and quad bikes and electricity.
This guy is trying to fix some wires.
Bit more health and safety. So you could see that a lot of the traditional ways were going to be lost quite soon, especially as the roads were being built. As soon as the roads open up, then these places will change radically. This was the town just before where we stayed for the Everest base camp on the Tibetan side of Everest. And we were greeted by a group of children coming out of school who were fascinated by our truck, which was going through another phase of breakdown. This is the Everest base camp on the Tibetan side, with a military checkpoint.
So we wandered up from here to see if we could get a glimpse of Everest.
Were you still with your guide at this point?
Yes.
Well, yes, we're with him. I don't think he wandered up.
No, he has to be with you the whole time, really. But he didn't wander up here, and some of our group did some things that didn't please the local military very much at all, and our guide he lost a point. He lost one of his 3 lives, as it were.
Wow.
Because they decided it would be quite a hoot to pose naked in front of Everest, which didn't go down very well.
So that's Everest in the background.
I think a complete lack of education on their part, actually, as much as anything else. The monastery that you've just seen there, we would love to have spent more time looking at, but the roads were so bad that in order to make Lhasa on time, where some of us had got flights booked, we just ended up being on the road almost continually all the way through Tibet.
We're getting closer to Lhasa. We've got some more elaborate architecture.
Amazing monasteries, absolutely amazing monasteries.
Good stopers.
I don't know what there's.
This is the Tashil Hunpo Monastery. And it's apparently home to the second most important Lama. And it was pretty old. Some sections of it were ancient. I think it was founded in 1450 or something.
Mind you, that would have worked for one of Emma's questions, second. So we've arrived in Lhasa, and classic butcher.
Jesus.
Tibetan doorknob. Very classic Tibetan window.
These guys are quite fun.
A
I
lot.
don't know quite what that is, to be honest, but
It's a cooking pot.
it's a massive.
It's a
cooking pot.
massive cooking pot. This was part of a temple, the Yokang temple, parts of which date from
Eh?
Here upstairs.
No, dreadful.
parts of which are over 1,000 years old. Prayer flags all over the place. And I'm clean.
Hey.
This was a cave that sold milky tea, and you could get it without yak butter, which was quite nice.
Oh, yak butter tea is gross.
And also had very, very good momos. Sort of a wrap around a nondescript piece of meat, but this was actually edible and not too gristly, so it was quite good.
Can I suggest to anyone who is a vegetarian or a vegan, Tibet is not the country to go.
You'll starve.
You would starve. Yeah.
Oh.
So that's the Patala. And it is an absolutely amazing building.
Haven't got a clue what they are.
Well, that's the last slide, I think. That's the Patala at night, so they light it all up.
Oh,
And it is,
It is stunning.
I don't know what it looks like now and whether it's changed much or what they've done to it, but
For some, I think we were tired by this point, and for some reason or another decided that we wouldn't go inside the Patala, which I really regret now, because I'm pretty certain we'll never get the opportunity to go back, and it would be very...
well, I think those that did go inside had said that most of the stuff inside had all been stripped out.
It's pretty empty.
Charge you $50 to go walk around the rooms that
I
were
think it was
fairly
it
empty.
wasn't that expensive, Daj. But
It still looks the same. The last time I was there, which would have been 2016.
okay, yeah.
It still looked the same, but Lhasa, you'd barely recognise it. It's a lot bigger than it was. I was out in 2007, so it was only 2 years before. No, sorry, it was 2009. I was out, so I was out at the same time.
So yes,
Same year. And that was the first time. And yeah, Lhasa's just grown exponentially.
has it? We didn't travel around Lhasa very much at all. We were actually staying quite close to the old bit.
Yeah, we were the same. And the Joking monastery as well, they fenced all that square off.
Have they?
Yeah, you got to pay to go into the square. You used to be able to see them prostrating round. That was one that they used to prostrate themselves round. Yeah, you can't get into that now.
But that's what the whole of Tibet felt like when we went out, that we were seeing it absolutely on the cusp of a very different era, and it did feel like we were seeing it before it changed out of all recognition.
Yeah,
and that it wasn't. I mean, that it was mostly being because of the Han Chinese and their sort of influence. But it also felt a little bit to do with the way that younger Tibetans were wanting a lot of the things that came with the Han Chinese. They wanted the, you know, modernity. They wanted computers and jobs, and they didn't want to be living a subsistence life anymore. So it felt like there was a much bigger picture to the, you know, what was going on. There was a bigger argument to the change in life going on there than just the Chinese moving. I mean, it was mostly the Chinese moving in and taking over.
Yeah, it was still the same 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And they actually, the Chinese actually pay the Han Chinese to move into Tibet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that was quite weird was that they, at the point when we went, there'd sort of, there'd been a period of time when the Han Chinese had been tearing down monasteries and making monasteries derelict, but there was a bit of a reversal of that.
Yeah.
And that they were actually sort of making these monasteries tourist destinations.
Yeah, they realised they could make money out of it.
Yeah, but for the Han Chinese, but for Chinese, not for us.
No,
very much not for foreign tourists, but for Chinese tourists.
Foreign devils.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where you stayed in Tingri, which is one of the places that's it used to be a bit of a hellhole, and there was a little monastery was on the top of the hill nearby, and basically the Chinese, I think it got damaged in the earthquakes. The Chinese basically ripped it down and are building a new little Gompa type thing, but in Chinese style.
Right.
So,
yeah, it was interesting. We weren't there long enough really to appreciate, and neither of us has read very much about what's going on either historically or politically, but it was very interesting that and seeing the different faces of Muslim across and then of course we actually flew into Kathmandu and we're seeing yet another different side to Muslim religion. It was, well, not so many there, no, but this is true. But yeah, it was.
How long were you in Tibet then, Claire?
Our whole trip was about 8 weeks. So we had about 3 weeks, about three and a half weeks in Pakistan, and then the rest of the time was going through China and into Tibet. So yeah, a reasonably long, and I reckon we probably had about 3 showers in the whole time. Well, maybe a few more, but there were certainly long periods between washing at times. It was.
You didn't go off each other.
Well, you get to the point where you come out the other side, don't you? So, after about day 3 or 4, then it starts to get a bit better again, and you start getting used to it all. Yeah. On day 6, you forgot what it's like to wash anyway.
And everyone was, we were all grubby on the trot. But actually, Tibet is very grubby. Tibetans don't wash. I mean, there are no trees in that part of Tibet. There are no trees.
Oh.
It's very, very dry, and you can see that they probably wear those clothes until they fall off them. That's certainly what it looked like.
Yak dung fires.
Yeah,
that's the only thing they've got to burn.
Yeah, and just after we left, but Hannah was still out with them, they were invited to a sky burial, and so they were invited to go and witness the way that it was an old lady who had died, and how they dispose of the body. And she arrived in the back of a very small car wrapped up in black bin bags. And she was rolled out of the bin bags, had a noose put round, she was naked. She had a noose put round her neck and was tethered to the ground. And then one of I don't know how many there were, but one of the Tibetans slashes into the back of her legs and her arms and down her back, sort of the way that you would a chicken if you were going to marinate it. And then they stand back and the vultures immediately swoop in. And Hannah said it was a frenzy for a little more than 2 minutes. And the body is just completely picked pretty clean. And she said at that point you could see why the body had been tethered by a noose round the neck, because they don't want the birds to fly off with the body. It needs to happen on the spot. And then after about 2 minutes, the Tibetan, I think there were about 3 of them, they scare the birds off, and then they gather up these now fairly cleaned bones and they bash them all with a rock, and they bash open the skull and pull out the brains, and they mix the brains with sugar and flour and then grind that all up with the bones, and then they throw that out again, and then the vultures and the dogs move back in. And apparently the quicker that this whole process happens, the better the karma, so that the sooner the whole body is cleared, the better the karma. But Hannah said what was interesting is that we've sort of been given to believe that this is all a very sacred thing that foreigners aren't meant to see. I don't know whether this might be the case in the South Americas, but Hannah said that it felt very much that this was just literally a disposal of an empty body. And the important bit had been the night before, when the family say goodbye to the spirit. And that bit is very private, and there's no way you would invite a foreigner to see that. I don't know. I only have a story of this one instant, but that was very much what Hannah said. Hannah became vegetarian after this for some years, because she said the overwhelming thing that struck her was how, when, quite obviously really, but you'd never think about it, is that when the birds are tearing apart this old woman's naked body lying there, is that it smells of meat. It smells of fresh meat. And Hannah said that was just so, it just made her feel so nauseous, she couldn't eat meat for some years after that. Was just the memory of this woman. And it's just such a different ritual, isn't it? The idea of us laying out our mother or whatever naked on a hillside. But you can't dig into the ground at all, and there's no wood to burn. So this is as quick and as clean a method of getting rid of a body as is possible.
Yeah. Very practical.
There were some pretty big birds of prey out there too.
I guess there's stuff that dies out there, and this is the only way you get rid of it, isn't it?
But yeah, not sure I would have needed to see that.
No, sounds pretty horrendous.
Very environmentally friendly, though.
Absolutely, yeah, it is, isn't it? I mean, it makes
the food chain.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, really, and it is the spirit that is important, and that, of course, in the Buddhist religion, has at that point moved on to either be a better human being or an ant.
I'm sure the vultures would agree.
What animals eat vultures?
Other vultures, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, the vultures. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting about your contact with the guy. Was it a man?
Amman, yes.
Yeah. That was just like meeting cultures and the same with the people on the bus, the difference in cultures, you know, there's no climbing. And on the other hand, there's people subsisting.
A lot of the other guys were pretty young, and they were, I guess they'd been sold it as a climbing trip.
Yeah.
They're kind of sport climbers.
Yeah.
And so they weren't really interested in doing stuff that wasn't sport climbing.
They weren't interested in the culture or the history of Tibet in any way, or most of them were. There were one or two of us who were. There
was a hardcore of
there was
probably about 6 of us who were quite keen to see other stuff than just go climbing.
Yeah.
I mean, we did actually go climbing in Tibet, didn't we? There was a rocky outcrop.
Yeah.
And they managed to get this guy to agree that we could stop the bus and go and climb a route.
But only by pretending that the truck had broken down and that we couldn't go any further.
DAJ and Clare, was the organisation, this big red bus, was it anything to do with the Petzl road trips that we read about now?
I don't know what the status of that company is. I know the guy who was running it at the time sold on the whole operation to somebody else, but I don't know what they've done with it. Whether they're
was he European or English or?
The guy who owned it at that time was an English guy.
It was called Hot Rock, wasn't it?
Yes, it was called Hot Rock.
It was called Hot Rock.
Yeah.
So
Hannah, I think Hannah joined a trip that started in Cape Town and ended in Istanbul. And she did the sections through Jordan, Syria, and Turkey, which, I mean, she had wonderful climbing for the 3 months she did it on her gap year. So in Jordan, she had fantastic climbing. And I think she had quite good climbing in Syria, but from what I remember, she didn't particularly enjoy Syria. I think they had quite a lot of issues with local men.
Well, I think they were all wearing short skirts and not covering their heads and wearing skimpy t-shirts, and then wondering why they were attracting so much attention.
Yeah, there was a bit of an issue with local men. Well, even when they were covering up, but and then Turkey, and they had some fantastic climbing in Turkey. And in actual fact, Hannah got us to go and climb in one of the places in Turkey too, which was great sport climbing, and would recommend it to anyone. Probably wouldn't recommend Tibet in the same way.
Limited sport climbing.
Limited sport climbing. And just a very difficult. I mean, Charlene will know it's a very difficult place to travel because you have to have an official guide to go anywhere, which then makes it very expensive. I don't think you could have done Tibet cheaper than we did. It really was.
Charlene, I get the impression that, because you've been to the Nepal side of Everest as well, I get the impression that the Nepal side is probably more interesting and more to see and do than the Tibetan side. Is that the case?
Yeah, there's more. Nepal's more geared up for tourism anyway, for doing the Everest base camp treks. As Claire says, traveling in Tibet is a bit awkward because you've got to have that, basically Chinese liaison officer, and if you're lucky, it will be a Tibetan person. But there's a lot of sort of monasteries and things like that, but they're quite far. They're quite big distances between them. Yeah. So I did a cycle from Lhasa to Kathmandu back in 2009. That's why I was out there, and yeah, we had big cycles, and we came down. We went up to the base camp on the north side, and I don't know where you think this as well, Claire, but Everest from the north side is absolutely stunning because it looks like it's sitting on its own.
Yes, Yeah, it is.
It is.
We were so lucky because we saw it clearly, you know, so we were unbelievably lucky.
Yeah, but when you look at Everest from the south side, it's sort of a little bit lost because it's sitting, you know, next to Lhotse and Nuptse, and you know, it's all just big mountains, so you don't get that sort of,
yeah,
you don't get as good an idea of just how big it is.
And it's quite an interesting little tourist. The place that we actually stayed was quite, I mean, and it's no trek. You drive right up to pretty much where we would. I think there's a walk of about, I don't know, a mile and a half, and an hour maybe.
I don't think there is any more. No. There's not any more. They've actually, the drive that you would have done up to the northern base camp, that was all really badly washboarded track.
Okay.
That's when I cycled it. It was really badly washboarded. It's a tarmac road now.
Yeah, we stayed in a little touristy village, which was, I mean, just classic sort of Chinese Tibetan place, sort of hostel-y place. It's always very, I mean, I think we got used to it out there, but you're given a bed, and the bedding has been that bedding for months. And initially that it's pretty grim actually, but I don't know why I particularly remember it there. Anyway, and then from there we walked up to the base camp, as you saw in the photos, which took us an hour maybe. But otherwise, I mean, you know, it's no trek. And actually the road up to that base camp was, I mean, it wasn't tarmac, but it was a good solid road.
Yeah.
That obviously the military drove up. So yeah, it was. I found it all fascinating. I had never been anywhere further than France, pretty much at that point, and so for me it was such a culture shock. That it was an extraordinary time. You know, my was in a bit of turmoil post divorce as it was, and then the thought that was meant to make me chill was, you know, de-stress, Mum. What you need.
It's a grubby bed.
Yeah, but it was good actually. I think to go away for such a long period of time, you have to stop thinking about what's happening at home because it's too far away. And I've never had that experience before. You know, when you only go away for 2, maybe 3 weeks, you know, you're always sort of thinking about what's going to happen when you get home. 8 weeks and you have to just let it go. And we were just it just felt so far away a lot of the time.
I think if you want to go trekking, Norman, you're better off in Nepal.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Bob and I. Bob, when were we there?
2004.
Was it 2004?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we went up to Lubotchi East.
Right.
Then round but we went up via Gokyo, which was really nice. Gokyo Lakes.
I think that the west and the east of Tibet are really quite different from what I understand. The part of Tibet we were in was unbelievably barren. Barren and no roads and no trees, and but Kailash was, I found Kailash an amazing experience. I found it really quite humbling walking around and seeing some of the people who were going around it and how significant it was for them, and how for us it was just a trek. You know, it was like walking up Helvellyn or something, you know, it's just another walk. But for some of the people there, it was so significant.
Wow.
And that did feel very, for me, it felt quite humbling, actually. And Kailash is just so beautiful. It is this perfect four-sided pyramid. So it was extraordinary. And I'm sure, too, that will have changed hugely because it is such a tourist attraction in the sense that it attracts all these pilgrims. So I'm sure that we saw it before there are hot dog stands every 30 feet or something. I'm sure you can probably smell the waft of a donut van there now or something like that. It's just, yeah, the Chinese were just invading everywhere. Aman, our Pakistani chap, who was wonderful. The Pakistan people hate the Chinese, they really do. But at the same time, they were quite happy to have them fix the Karakoram Highway because it means so much to the Chinese to have that transport infrastructure. But Aman described the Chinese as all over the place like shit. It was like, what it was.
I can't remember that.
Yeah, it wasn't shit. It was.
That was the gist of it. Yeah.
Manure. It was manure. That's right.
All right.
That's because my dad had once said that I was all over the place like muck on a field, for which I had never forgiven him. And then that's right. And then Aman used this phrase that he said the Chinese were all over the place like manure.
That could almost be a compliment, couldn't it? I mean, manure is a good thing. He probably didn't mean that, though.
I don't think he meant that.
I think the shit might be the better translation.
And the Chinese who were all living by the side of the road in these sort of tarpaulin, just shelters, they were all making this absolutely hideous moonshine, which, of course, the local Muslim people really didn't approve of at all. But some of our hot rockers quite enjoyed.
You thinking of taking up relationship counselling then, Max?
Anyway, Kailash was, I thought Kailash was an extraordinary experience, and that was well worth going to. I think that Michael Palin went there on one of his round his globe trips.
Do you know if it's still unclimbed then? Have people stayed off it?
Sorry?
Yeah, I think it's still
unclimbed. It is still unclimbed.
That's good.
It is unclimbed. Although the Chinese have, I think several times they've offered to people to climb and people have declined or not managed it because it's caused such outrage for a mountain which is so important to many people. As I say, seriously, it is better known than Everest.
Yeah. The Chinese haven't gone and climbed it.
It is 6,714 feet. Meters. Sorry, meters. Yeah. So, not inconsiderable height.
No.
Although you are starting well above sea level.
Yeah. It's high. Oh, and all these poor Indians who had arrived as sort of part of a sort of travel coach party, and they're all wearing cheap tracksuits, weren't they? Cheap tracksuits and trashy trainers, and
they're all freezing.
And they were freezing and sick with altitude.
Mind you, half of our truck was sick.
Half of our truck was sick too. Yeah.
It's about 4,000 metres on Tibetan Plateau.
Yes, and there's no way to get lower.
And how high were you before you went up there? Was that quite low then?
It was probably about 2,500 maybe.
Oh, right.
So I can't remember what height Kashgar is. It might even be lower than that.
I think
It was certainly a massive height gain up onto the plateau, and then once you're up there, there was no way to get any lower.
Did they do that in one day then?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Quite serious.
So they were lucky that they didn't have a more serious problem. But there we are.
So, ta-da!
Hey!
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, guys.